Hey, this is Ben Lindbergh of Button Mash Moderate fame, joined by my pal, Steve Arkham-inspired from the Midnight Boys. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Ben. How's it going?
It's going well. There is a little video game coming out a little later this month. It's called Lego Batman, Legacy of the Dark Knight. People may have heard of it. We will be covering it on Button Mash when everyone has their hands on it, but you had your grubby little hands on it weeks before the rest of us. You got to attend a preview event. You spent some time with this game. I'm not jealous at all. And so you are here to report back on your experience. We're going to talk about what you saw and what you played while people watch some of what you watched and played. So give us a sense of what this preview event was like.
Yes. Warner Brothers invited myself and producer Devon out to a secluded place in Los Angeles to play a little bit of the new Lego Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight video game. And as you see here, it's a kind of delightful rendering of the Batman Arkham games of old. And it's something of a passion project for TT Games that has been long in the works, apparently. And we've had a pretty extensive playthrough time to talk about it. They let us play the game for about 2 hours across 3 different chapters and then a free roaming section across Arkham City. It's a wonderful little experience that I'm sort of excited to dive in with you about today.
Yeah, so this is highly anticipated, obviously. It comes out May 22nd. For pretty much all platforms, there's a Switch 2 version coming out a little later after the other versions. And it's anticipated because Batman, and also because Lego and Lego Batman. You put those two things together, people tend to like them. And this is not the first Lego game, far from it. This is not the first Lego Batman game. It is the fourth, depending on how you define it. But you mentioned the Arkham comp. And that's a weighty comp to drop on a game because the Arkham games are some of the best regarded video games of all time. Certainly the best regarded superhero games, highly influential combat wise. And so that raised an eyebrow, obviously made me intrigued. But anytime you're going to say that this is a little bit like Arkham, well, that makes sense because it's a Batman game, but maybe it makes a little less sense because it's a Lego game and we tend to think of something a little more simplistic and kid-friendly and family-friendly and just not quite as complex as the combat system in Arkham. So what did you see here that seemed to owe a debt to those games?
I mean, it's hard not to try to attempt to fill the massive shoes that Rocksteady is doing and filling. And TT Games has kind of made a very admirable attempt at this amazing combat system that Rocksteady more or less perfected. And I think I would say with the highest of compliments that this isn't exactly a 100% riff on that. This is what I'm affectionately calling baby's first Arkham game. And it has all of those 10 amounts of classic Arkham combat that you could have. You have dazzling combos, very directional based. You can counter. You have all of these big elaborate takedowns and gadgets to implement in its combat. But I think the important thing to note here is that TT Games is actually very philosophically both married to and divorced from that gameplay because it's kind of making its own spin on it. I can talk about the story in a little bit, but the combat itself and the experience that it wants to cultivate is something kind of entirely new while keeping up with the structure that Rocksteady kind of established. And I think nothing is kind of more well illustrated in that than in its combat and in its kind of moment-to-moment interactions in its playstyles. It's very evocative of those games, but it also has a lot of that TT Games charm where you're going to find a lot of jokes, you're going to find a lot of sight gags, and all of the takedown animations are very clever and cute and fun. I don't think that there's anything that you can find to fault this game for because it is kind of ripped straight out of the pages and the screen of all of your favorite Lego movies and all of the great kind of like Lego properties that you've seen, a la the Star Wars saga, the Skywalker saga video games, as well as the TV shows that you'd seen in the Lego Star Wars universe. I think it perfectly fits with that brand and that philosophy.
Yeah, you could say when you've played one Lego game, you've played a lot of Lego games, right? There's a template, there's a format, there's a tried and true formula. And I think plenty of people are not tired of playing Lego games like this, but you might worry at a certain point, will this start to seem stale? Will the humor seem a little less charming, seem like something we've seen before? Does it just become kind of a reskin of games that we've played and liked before? What would you say differentiates this game based on your experience from previous Lego games, previous Lego Batman games specifically?
I think the reason that I can differentiate this, even between different Lego Batman games, is not only are these collectathons of, I think, the most purest sense, like the kind of joy of looking through this entire world, exploring every nook and cranny, trying to see all of these like wonderful little Easter eggs and gags and jokes that these loving creators have put into these games. But it also kind of wants to be every Batman game that you've ever known. It wants to be every Batman movie you've ever known and give you its own unique spin on that tale. To get into the story of this game a little bit, the way that it tries to present everything is kind of taking you from Bruce Wayne being the origin of the League of Shadows and kind of like taking on the mantle of Batman while evoking a lot of the imagery and a lot of the motifs and themes and even lines that you would see in many Batman movies. That evokes Nolan, evokes the Matt Reeves movies, even back to Tim Burton and the 60s Adam West era. All of these things have kind of come together in a sort of amalgamation that TT Games have lovingly recreated and made its own thing with a dash of humor and unrelenting charm.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the appeals of these games, I think, is that it's kind of a postmodern mashup. It's just franchise spanning, right? It's not an adaptation of any particular arc, any particular movie or comics run. It's just all of it. You know, you like Batman, probably the Batman that you like best is represented in here somewhere. So it's sort of like Lego Star Wars, the Skywalker saga, but Batman. Except, I guess, you know, the organizing principle is maybe not quite as clear as the Skywalker saga, where you have these interlocking, overlapping trilogy of trilogies, but it is similar in the sense that it spans that everything that Batman has encompassed on screen, right? So something for everyone. And I guess you could say, you know, jack of all trades, master of none, or maybe you're stretched too thin or you're trying to do too much. But in my experience, at least, and certainly with the Skywalker saga, there really is an inherent pull to just being able to play all of these scenarios with any of these characters, and they're all represented. So I assume that that also holds true for this game.
It very much does. I think that you won't find anything not represented in this game in some form or fashion if you are remotely a fan of the world of Batman. I think that the best thing that I can say about this game is that it doesn't want to leave anything out. And if you are even remotely a fan of anything that Batman has ever been, it will be talked about in some form or fashion in this game. I am kind of stunned at the level of love and care and attention to detail that TT Games really wants to put into this. And like, you've seen this in the Skywalker saga and the Lego games of the recent past, but this is kind of taking it to a new level because of the fact that it's kind of this unchapterized, unrelenting, constant experience. I think the biggest gripe that I would have had with, say, the Skywalker saga for the Lego Star Wars games was the fact that it has a lot of chapters. It has a lot of things that kind of like disconnect you from the different stories that become the grand opera that is Star Wars. You would have lots of Luke-based missions, and then you'd go to the sequel trilogy, and then you'd go on to Anakin's story, and then all of these, like, you would bounce across different multiple instances. This, you are in Arkham City, you are playing as Batman, and then you are also going along on these missions that are either co-op or drop in, drop out with a AI character that are integral to the story that you're telling. And that's kind of the thing that in a weird way is grounding this Lego game in a way that, like, I've really liked the idea that this is going to be sort of an ever-present experience for the player. It's not going to be a thing where you kind of chapterize, okay, I'm going to play just, the Death Star run mission, or I'm going to play the pod racing zone in episode 1 of Phantom Menace. This is going to be a thing that you are coming back to, collecting multiple times, going through levels that you've already previously explored because you want to get all of the different collectibles that you've had here. I think it's really, really important to know that this is kind of going to be the game that is going to carry over that Rockstar mantle, because we haven't had something like this in quite a long time. And it's really, really refreshing.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes people say you can't be all things to all people, but the Lego games seem to say, but what if you can? What if you can be for...
It's certainly try.
Yeah. What if you could be for all ages? What if you could be all Batman? What if you can be all gameplay styles? If you want a more arcadey, pick up and play, gradual learning curve, or what if you miss the Arkham games and you want a little bit more complexity? Again, you can get yourself into trouble when you try to do everything, but some of these games have somewhat successfully. Now, one way, I guess, in which this game has been scaled back a bit relative to, say, the Skywalker Saga, I think the playable character count in the Skywalker Saga is up to 380, something along those lines. So
it was absurd. It was genuinely absurd.
It was, yes. And maybe it's overkill at some point, or maybe it's you got to catch them all. I don't know. Completists appreciate it. But this game, they seem to have intentionally dialed that down a bit, even though all these eras and stories are represented. You can't necessarily take the controls for all of them, which might be disappointing to people who are used to the more expansive suite of playable characters. But it seems like that's been done for a purpose, namely that the characters will actually play a little bit differently, that there will be some specificity to them as opposed to just one size fits all. It's a different skin, but it's the same game. So I don't know how many characters you got to try out, but tell me, were they differentiated? Could you tell that this will be a different experience if you choose one character instead of another?
I think that was pretty well illustrated here. When we got to play the game, we played about 3 missions that were dedicated chapters in this game's story. And each one had its own sort of companion character that followed Batman along with him. So first thing that we played was the encounter at the Iceberg Lounge, notorious hideout of the Penguin. And you and Commissioner Gordon are on a mission to find Falcone. And Jim Gordon has this like goo gun that you can kind of like gum up the works of like certain bits of machinery or movable platforms that help you along the way to traverse the level. It's kind of a required part of the level that you switch characters and use this item or use this small part of this character to kind of progress in the level. Only takes me out of it a tiny bit to know that like, oh, this actually can really be a lot more rewarding if it is played with 2 people. And the immediate pushback is, well, one person's got to play Batman, the other person has got to not play Batman. So the trade-off of that being you'll eventually be playing parts of his rogues gallery and all of his sidekicks that are quite known. The, I think, exact known playable character count wasn't made known to us. We had about 7 that we were made fully aware of, and the kind of collectathon aspect of the multiple playable characters that you mentioned before, like the Star Wars games, this is illustrated a bit more differently in the kind of hub area that you can go to, that is the Batcave. Every bit of collectible, every bit of side quest, every bit of things that you could possibly earn or achieve in this game is elegantly and kind of awesomely displayed in this Batcave. It is showing off all of the Batmobile skins that you've unlocked, all of the costumes that you have found, which are seemingly like in the almost hundreds. Like it's a lot of like the multiple costumes that Batman has, the ones that Robin has, the one that Catwoman has, the ones that Commissioner Gordon has. Everything is on display here. And amongst all of the things that you can unlock and discover, there's also things that you can physically buy, not buy with money, but buy with in-game currency known as, studs that you can find in the level. You get your overall stud count of how much money you have collected in this level. And then you can go into this Batmart essentially and buy more costumes, buy more things for your Batcave, buy more Batmobiles. And the beautiful, beautiful cycle of collecting repeats itself in beautiful, harmonious fashion. I think that's kind of the thing that is also going to really bring the Lego game formula forward, if that makes sense, because we have so many different types of properties that Lego can improve upon, but Batman is very much an insular thing. So many different types of characters and places and motifs that you can explore. It's all illustrated in this Batcave in a way that I've really, really enjoyed.
Anytime you and I are on a call together, Steve, the stud count is 2.
Hey, buddy.
Yeah. My only disappointment is that we will not have a stud count of 2 when we are playing this, because we probably won't be playing it together, unfortunately. And this is not new for TT Games. This was the case for the Skywalker Saga, but that was 4 years ago. I hoped maybe things would be different, but no online co-op in this game, right? And there's couch co-op, and I love local co-op, don't get me wrong, but it does mean that unless one of us visits the other, we will sadly not be able to team up. We will not be able to be the Robin to each other's Batman. So that seems like it would take things to the next level, maybe next time. But gameplay-wise, it doesn't affect anything if you have another person to play with locally. It's just, I'd like to experience this saga with you. That's all I'm saying.
But I will say, and I would actually like to ask you this, Ben, in your pursuit of being a father and imparting our great hobby of loving video games onto your daughter, has the Lego series kind of taken to Sloane in ways that you think that any other games would have liked? Does she glom onto that? Does she glom onto Mario? What's her thing?
Yeah, she's become a big Nintendo kid, unsurprisingly. She's into all things Mario. She wants a Mario birthday party. Batman has not been her jam as of yet. She's not against Batman. She just hasn't really embraced Batman or been introduced to Batman so much. But I think Lego games would be very much her speed and up her alley. I think she could handle this. So, she's 4.5 going on 5. I think probably she could dabble, I think, in the Lego gameplay experience. I think maybe, depending on how Arkham-like that combat actually is. I know it's much more approachable than that. So, I'd hate to have her tag in for the couch co-op and get her character's ass kicked. It might be demoralizing, but I think probably she could handle a little light Lego game experience, and that'd be fun for us.
Yeah, I think that the best way that I could describe this is that I would desperately want my friends who are not into gaming playing this game, because they at least know Batman. And listen, as a mid-30s not father, I can certainly find a couple of friends of mine that aren't that into video games, and this is definitely something that can be turned into a bit of a party game if they wanted to just sit around, shoot the shit, and make a kind of fun evening out of couch co-op. That definitely needs to be the case. We should need to be bringing that back more. But back to the idea that TT Games have kind of made something a bit more unique here, I think it is also well illustrated in the story and the type of tone that they wanted to set with this game. Obviously, it's going to be lighthearted and fun, as all these Lego games are, but I've bristled at the idea of having Lego games with characters that talk. I think I'm guessing you remember the era of Lego games where most characters just spoke in a or kind of affect, where they just wanted to kind of grunt their way through a sort of character moment, and all of it would be in these wonderful tongue-in-cheek dialogue-free games that had this very cute and fun story inside of it.
Yeah, lots of mugging with Lego expressions, lots of slapstick. Yeah,
exactly. And I found that wonderfully charming. I kind of made that was the ethos of what made a great Lego game to me, is to know that almost anybody can see this game and get it, language free, no translation needed. But knowing that this game is fully voice cast and it's ripped out of the pages of the Lego Batman games, the person who voices Bruce Wayne, more or less a one-for-one comp of a Will Arnett's level gristled Batman performance that's comically over the top. but it has to strike a very interesting balance of like kind of carrying you through a Batman story while also being funny and charming and a little self-serious. And I think it really strikes a good balance here. I think that's probably found best when there's a moment in this demo where we got to play as Dick Grayson and his family and their final performance, basically out of the Batman and Robin movies. And this is where Two-Face invades the level and basically has a bomb to set off. And you, Batman, and Dick Grayson are like kind of jumping your way through platforms and circus hoops and all of these things in this setting to know that, you know, there might be the demise of somebody's parents that would make one boy wonder become the Robin. I don't know if anybody knows the origins of Robin, but it's very sad. But there's this like wonderful tongue-in-cheek nature about like, oh, Dick Grayson, my beautiful son, I can't wait to be at the circus with you forever. Cute, cheeky lines like that, while still being the game that when characters die, they just kind of like explode into like a leg piece, a chest piece, and a head piece. And then that's it.
Matt Berry as Bane. Incredible casting.
End of sentence. You don't need anything else. If you weren't sold before, give him your $70. Matt Berry is Bane.
Since we're talking about the production value aspect of things, Skywalker Saga was a cross-gen title, so it was for the current-gen consoles, but also had to support the original Switch and PlayStation 4, Xbox One. This is current-gen only, and people can see for themselves, as we speak here, what it looks like. And you know, it's not as if you're expecting a Lego game to be the greatest graphical showcase, but do you detect any new coat of paint, any new extra polish here, any perceptible sign of, yeah, we don't need to support last-gen systems anymore, so we can soup things up a bit?
I mean, and my personal opinions of get your money up, not your funny up, this console generation being like, yes, I know times are hard. Consoles are expensive. RAM is out the wazoo as far as prices are concerned. But like, yeah, there has to be a point where we all have to move on and like know that this is the current gen. And there are certain things that we can stand pat with. I was actually quite impressed with how this game looks. Not only is it just made of rectangles and blocks, literally, but I think the idea of kind of evoking again the look of a real Lego piece and looking like those Lego movies are, which are kind of visually dazzling at times. This is kind of very well rendered. We were playing this game at a souped up PC with, you know, everything turned up to 11, and everything was looking kind of amazing. Actually, there was like a glistening sheen on certain Lego bricks. When it was raining, there would be a light drizzle across everything. Everything was animated incredibly well, and as well as, you know, a great sort of volumetric lighting effects and, you know, like the amount of care and technical prowess that you think would be needed for a Lego game wouldn't actually be that demanding. But I was rather impressed at how good looking this game can be, even knowing that at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of bricks.
Yeah, Skywalker Saga was on a proprietary engine. This one is on Unreal Engine 5. And this is an open world Gotham. Not the first. I guess there was an open world Gotham in Lego Batman 2 DC Superheroes, but that was almost 15 years ago. So I don't know whether you got a sense of the scope and the scale and the detail of this Gotham or how much of it you explored, but did you get a sense of how sprawling this setting is?
I was so when I first opened up that map when we were left to our own devices and like left to explore all of Gotham, I was kind of shocked at how involved that map was, because you open it up and there's like a dazzling array of things that you can go to, collect, challenge points, Riddler trophies, and puzzles and markers and all of these things. And even when you're set off to drive in your Batmobile or grapple across the city, it's kind of going to feel like it's one for one with the Arkham Knight specifically. It is a massive, like, I think 5 little islands of Gotham City that are scattered throughout, all of which can be explored in real time with no loading screen or anything. It's kind of massive feeling. And even in those bigger spaces, they managed to find little details and little bits of charm to sprinkle throughout this game. There were like pun-tastic billboards of hardly dented auto repair and stuff like that, where Harvey Dent had like an endorsement with a car detailing shop and stuff like that. I barged into a convenience store and slipped on a wet floor slick, and like the cashier behind the counter was surprised, and she was like, "Oh my God, Batman!" And then I ran out. And there's a level of detail that, again, was wildly unnecessary for a game like this. And I can kind of say that it does follow, again, in its footsteps of Rocksteady, because the level of detail, while, cute and charming and tongue-in-cheek, is still there. And it's something that I kind of have to admire in a game like this.
Lego Batman didn't have to go that hard, is what you're saying. But it did anyway.
It really did. I was not familiar with its game.
Is there anything else that you want to make people familiar with? Any other footage you want to show? Any other highlights? Any other little things you notice?
For me, one of the highlights of this playthrough was the ongoing changing of scenery in this first instance of the Iceberg Lounge, because not only is it this big nightclub that can be scary or imposing as a goon hideout, different meaning in 2026, but the ways in which this level changes and drastically, thusly, kind of evokes different themes. Perfect example: we are fighting our way through the entrance to a club, and then that goes into an office building, and then that goes into a freezer / kitchen area, and then that goes into a ball pit. And it's this wild running joke of all of the henchmen that the Penguin and Falcone hired opted for this instead of health insurance. And it's this wonderful little departure into the absurd that the 60s era Batman only dabbled into, while still being that kind of self-serious, yes, I'm Batman and I'm going to, kick your butts. And even though you didn't pick health insurance, you're going to go into the ball pit. And then even after that, you in a cutscene, there's this wild big gadget with that you build throughout it to break down a door. That's you master builder your way to make a giant punching fist, and then it just ejects it into the door. And then there's a disco rhythm game dance sequence so you have to distract guards. So you're doing dance moves and stuff like that. The variety that happens in that one level is something that I definitely want to see during the full release, to think of this wild, absurd journey that you can go on, kind of mashing up different genres of Batman and gameplay that makes a kind of an amazing, fun ride. That's really the best thing that I can come away with. This is an absurd and wild ride that is probably going to be worth your time when it comes out later this month.
Well, I felt some FOMO not attending this event. And to be clear, I was not excluded. They didn't say, Steve, you're invited, don't bring Ben. It's just, logistics. We're on opposite coasts here. But I feel a little less missing out now that you have captured and published this footage for me and for everyone. So we don't have too much longer to wait until we all get the full experience here, because we're used to games getting delayed. This game got brought forward a week. So May 22nd is the date. We will, of course, be giving this the full Button Mash podcast treatment. So stay tuned for the more in-depth discussion once we have played through the whole thing. And hopefully this game will tide us over until Robert Pattinson is back with us again next year. And this video that we're narrating now will tide people over a couple of weeks until they can play this thing for themselves. And it's going to be a busy late May, what with a new Forza and a new James Bond game. But don't sleep on a new Batman game smack dab between those other two blockbusters, because we're pretty pumped for this thing.
Mr. Wayne? You wanted to see me?
I did, and call me Bruce. It's time to start training.
Training?